in the Red Sea.
U.S. Navy SEALs discovering components of Iranian-made ballistic missiles on a boat off the coast of Somalia. This is the raid where 2 Navy SEALs went missing last week in the Atlantic Ocean.
Iran, meanwhile, has seized 2 container ships trying to get out of the Gulf via the Strait of Hormuz. The first time it's actually seized ships.
The raid was not meant to destroy Iran's missile silo. That is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Somewhere under the Zagros Mountains, buried behind rock, steel, and official silence, a U.S. Ranger team moved toward a target Washington would never publicly admit existed. But the real question is not how they got in. It is who wanted them there, why Tehran hesitated to respond, and what happens when the next 72 hours become a countdown no one can stop. Because this was never just Iran versus America.
Watch the map. To the west, Iraq. To the south, the Persian Gulf. To the east, Pakistan.
And running like a spine through Iran's interior, the Zagros Mountains, 990 miles of hard terrain, deep valleys, old smuggling routes, and military tunnels hidden from satellites by geography itself. For decades, Iran understood one brutal truth: it could not match the United States in the air, at sea, or in global logistics. So it built a different kind of battlefield.
Underground.
Missile halls under mountains, drone depots under desert, fuel tunnels under civilian infrastructure. Command rooms wrapped in concrete thick enough to turn a bunker buster into a headline instead of a solution. On paper, the United States had everything. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, hundreds of stealth aircraft, bases from Qatar to Bahrain to Diego Garcia, satellites crossing overhead every 90 minutes. But in one narrow corner of western Iran, all of that power ran into a problem.
A door. Not a physical door. A strategic one.
Because if America bombed the site, Tehran could respond through Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, Houthi missiles, cyber attacks, or a tanker fire in the Strait of Hormuz, where roughly 1/5 of the world's oil flow passes through a channel only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. One spark there does not stay local. It becomes gasoline prices in Ohio, insurance shocks in London,
panic in Tokyo, emergency meetings in Riyadh.
So Washington had a choice: strike loudly and risk a regional war, or move quietly and steal the one thing more valuable than the silo itself: its secret. And that is where the Rangers enter the story. Not as superheroes,
not as ghosts,
as a message. The impossible situation began with a missile launch that did not happen. That sounds strange, but in military intelligence, silence can be louder than an explosion.
A transporter moved. A convoy vanished.
Iranian air defenses lit up for 11 minutes, then went dark. Western satellites caught heat signatures near a mountain complex, then nothing.
No missile test. No announcement.
No propaganda video from state television.
Silence.
For Tehran, that was unusual. Iran does not hide strength when showing strength is useful. It parades missiles through Tehran. It paints slogans on launchers. It lets cameras linger on underground missile cities, like cathedrals of deterrence. But this time, there was no show, which meant one of two things: either the test failed, or the weapon was not meant to be seen yet. Remember that distinction. At 1,500 kilometers of range, an Iranian ballistic missile threatens U.S. bases across the Gulf. At 2,000 kilometers, the map gets wider. At higher accuracy, the game changes completely. A missile does not need to flatten a base to matter. It only needs to hit fuel farms, runways, radar arrays, or parked aircraft worth $80 million each. One hit can shut down a runway. 3 can paralyze a theater. And if the missile can move, hide, fire, and disappear, then the most advanced military in history starts facing a much older problem. The mountain always gets a vote. By the time analysts in Virginia and Tampa began comparing images, the same number kept appearing in briefings: 72 hours. Not because a war was certain in 72 hours, because that was how long the intelligence window would remain useful. After that, equipment could be moved, codes could rotate, personnel could vanish. The silo could become just another dark rectangle in a satellite photo. And then came the name no one expected. Not a general in Tehran. Not a president in Washington.
A logistics officer.
Because wars do not begin with speeches. They begin with movement.
Fuel. Batteries.
Guidance packages.
Mobile cranes. Fiber optic cable.
Security rotations. Trucks with the wrong tires on the wrong road at the wrong hour. That was the first crack. A convoy tied to the IRGC Aerospace Force had taken a route that made no commercial sense. It avoided 2 main highways, crossed through a controlled valley, and disappeared near a facility long believed to be inactive. Inactive. That word has buried more intelligence failures than almost any other. The facility had been dismissed because there was no visible launch infrastructure.
No obvious pad.
No large above-ground gantries. Nothing dramatic enough for television graphics. But Iran had not been building for television. It had been building for survival. The Zagros site was not a launch base in the old Cold War sense. It was a node, one chamber in a dispersed system designed to survive the first strike, preserve command control, and make retaliation almost impossible to fully suppress. And here is the first twist. The Rangers were not sent to blow it up. Blowing it up would have told Tehran exactly what Washington knew. Instead, the mission was built around a quieter objective: confirm whether the site was connected to a new command network, one that could link missiles, drones, and proxy forces into a single escalation machine. That sounds technical.
It is not.
It is the difference between Iran firing one missile battery as a warning and Iran triggering a synchronized regional response from Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and the Gulf all at once.
5 fronts, 1 clock.
That is what scared Washington.
But there was a second problem. Russia. Not Russian troops. Not Russian flags.
Something more useful and harder to prove: technical fingerprints,
Components.
signal architecture, hardened communications methods, patterns that looked familiar to analysts who had spent years watching systems tested in Ukraine. If the Zagros site was becoming a hardened command node with outside assistance, then this was no longer just a US-Iran problem. It was a rehearsal. A rehearsal for how sanctioned states survive American surveillance, borrow each other's methods, and build weapons networks beneath the threshold of open war. Now ask the uncomfortable question: why send Rangers instead of aircraft? Because aircraft create evidence.
Radar tracks.
Intercepts,
Wreckage. Pilots. Escalation ladders. Public deadlines.
a ground operation, if it succeeds, gives Washington something air power cannot.
Ambiguity.
Tehran knows something happened. Washington knows Tehran knows. But neither side has to say the word war. That gray space is where the modern battlefield lives.
Not peace. Not war. Pressure.
The Rangers were selected not because they were the biggest force, but because the mission was narrow,
Fast.
intelligence-driven. No theatrical firefight.
No occupation.
No flag on a bunker wall. Just entry, confirmation, extraction. And one item mattered more than anything else: a communications package believed to be linked to the silo's fire control chain.
Not the missile. The chain.
Because a missile without a trusted command system is a weapon. A missile inside a protected network is strategy. This is the delayed reveal. The target was never the silo.
It was the nervous system.
For months, US intelligence had been watching Iran test pieces of a distributed strike architecture. Drones that could saturate defenses, missiles that could arrive in waves, proxy launch teams that could deny direct orders while still serving a strategic design. Separately, each piece was dangerous. Together, they created a nightmare. Imagine Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar watching incoming drones, Bahrain tracking fast boats, US destroyers in the Gulf locking onto cruise missile profiles, Israel watching Lebanon, Saudi Arabia watching Yemen, Iraq erupting with militia rockets. No single attack large enough to justify all-out war. Every attack connected enough to overwhelm decision-makers.
That was the point. Not destruction. Confusion.
And confusion is a weapon. At roughly 3 a.m. local time, according to the scenario built from open military logic and regional reporting patterns, the window opened. Iranian air defenses were not blind, but they were looking outward. That matters. Defensive systems are designed around assumptions. When commanders expect missiles, they stare at the sky. When they expect sabotage, they watch gates, roads, and known approach corridors. But mountains create blind spots no radar budget can erase. The Rangers reached the outer security zone with one job: avoid becoming the story.
No dramatic firefight.
No Hollywood explosions. Because the moment bullets started flying, the mission would change from intelligence collection to crisis management. And crisis management favors the defender. Inside the complex, the most valuable thing was not a warhead.
Not even a missile body.
It was evidence of integration: signal routing, hardware markings, maintenance records, connection maps, serial numbers that could tie Iranian systems to foreign suppliers or proxy command nodes.
Tiny details. Huge consequences.
One serial number can expose a smuggling route. One frequency plan can expose a command doctrine. One maintenance log can prove whether a site is experimental or operational. This is why Tehran did not immediately announce the breach. Because to announce it, Iran would have to explain what was breached. And if the site was tied to a capability Tehran had not yet revealed, publicity would damage deterrence more than silence. So both sides had an incentive to lie by omission. Washington said nothing because success depended on denial. Tehran said nothing because outrage would confirm vulnerability. Two enemies, locked in the same silence for opposite reasons. That is the kind of silence that moves markets. But the mission almost turned at the worst possible moment.
Not at the perimeter. Not in the tunnel. At extraction.
Because the most dangerous phase of a raid is often the part after the objective is complete. The mind relaxes.
The clock accelerates.
The enemy begins to notice patterns it missed earlier.
A delayed check-in.
A camera loop that does not match. A guard commander who realizes 2 routine signals are missing from the same sector. Then the mountain wakes up. The first Iranian reaction was not a general alarm.
It was localized.
That tells you something. Either the defenders did not know the scale of the intrusion, or they were under orders to contain it quietly. Both possibilities are revealing. If they did not know, the site had been penetrated deeper than expected. If they did know and stayed quiet, then higher command feared the political cost of exposing it. Either way, Washington had the proof it needed. But proof creates its own danger. Because once US officials understood what the Zagros node represented, they faced a colder question than whether the mission succeeded. What do you do with intelligence that could prevent a war, but might start one if revealed? Leak it, and Iran hardens the network. Hide it, and allies panic when unexplained alerts begin. Confront Tehran privately, and you admit proximity. Strike the site, and you hand every hardliner in the region the image they have wanted for years: American forces inside Iranian territory. That is why the next 72 hours mattered. Not because missiles were definitely about to fly. Because every actor had to decide what lesson to draw.
Iran could accelerate.
America could preposition. Israel could prepare its own option. Gulf states could quietly raise defenses while publicly calling for calm. And proxy groups could move just enough to signal loyalty without crossing the threshold. This is where Loop 2 closes. Why did Washington stay silent? Because silence was the only tool that preserved freedom of action. A public victory would have been emotionally satisfying and strategically stupid. It would have forced Tehran to answer. It would have trapped allies into public positions. It would have turned an intelligence success into a diplomatic timer. Silence kept the board fluid, but it also opened the most dangerous loop of all. What if Iran learned the wrong lesson? What if Tehran concluded that America would violate the mountain but avoid open war at almost any cost? That is not deterrence. That is an invitation to test the line again. By hour 24, air defense crews across the Gulf would be watching screens a little more closely. Tanker operators would be reading risk bulletin. Intelligence officers would be hunting for convoy movement. And somewhere inside Iran's command structure, someone would be asking which internal system failed. That question can be more dangerous than the raid. Regimes fear foreign enemies. They fear internal betrayal more. A breach inside a protected missile complex forces an investigation. Investigations create paranoia. Paranoia creates purges. Purges create mistakes. And mistakes around missiles do not stay contained. Around hour 36, the first visible signs would not look
like war.
They would look like routine military housekeeping.
Leave cancelled.
Units repositioned. Communications reduced. Senior commanders photographed at unrelated ceremonies to prove normalcy. Watch this closely. Authoritarian systems often signal stability hardest when they feel least stable.
Then comes the max tension point. Hour 48.
A US destroyer in the region detects unusual coastal radar activity. An Iranian-linked militia channel posts a vague warning. Commercial aircraft adjust routes. A Gulf monarchy quietly asks Washington for reassurance. Oil traders begin pricing fear before any shot is fired. Nothing has happened. Everything has changed. That is the power of a raid no one admits. The battlefield shifts inside the minds of decision-makers. Iran now knows its mountain is not untouchable. America now knows Iran's underground network may be more connected than expected. Allies now suspect they were living inside a countdown they could not see.
And the proxies? They wait.
Because their value is not just in firing rockets. Their value is in making Washington wonder which rocket is Tehran's order and which is a local commander chasing relevance. That ambiguity is Iran's shield. But after Zagros, ambiguity cuts both ways. Because if Washington can reach into a mountain without declaring war, then Tehran has to defend everywhere.
Every tunnel, every depot, every courier, every contractor, every radio burst.
Defense becomes expensive.
Trust becomes scarce.
And the system Iran built to survive pressure starts consuming itself from the inside. Now the full picture comes into view. The Rangers did not infiltrate Zagros to win a battle. They went in to answer one strategic question. Has Iran crossed from scattered deterrence into integrated regional command? If the answer was no, then the crisis could be managed. If the answer was yes, then the Middle East had entered a new phase, one where a missile silo in the mountains could speak to drone teams in Iraq, anti-ship crews near the Gulf, and proxy commanders hundreds of miles away, all under a command chain designed to stay deniable until the moment it mattered.
That is the nightmare. Not one missile. A system.
And systems are harder to bomb than buildings. This is why the operation matters, whether it is ever confirmed or buried forever under official denial. Because the real contest between the United States and Iran is no longer about who can destroy more. America wins that contest on day one. The real contest is who controls escalation, who can move closest to the edge without falling over it. Who can force the other side to reveal capability first? Who can make silence feel like victory? At the end of the 72 hours, there may be no speech, no Pentagon briefing, no Iranian admission, no dramatic footage, just a few quiet adjustments,
A convoy route abandoned.
a commander reassigned,
A frequency change.
a destroyer moved 40 nautical miles, a missile site that no longer trusts its own walls. And that is how modern war often announces itself. Not with a mushroom cloud, not with a declaration, with a correction on a classified map. But one question remains open. If the Zagros node was only one part of the network, where is the next one? Because mountains do not keep secrets forever, and neither do the men who build tunnels inside them.